Day. Quite tenuous cloud breaks, so they may come and go in places, but where we do get prolonged clear spells, rural parts of Wales, central England, Scotland, temperatures a few degrees below freezing as we start off Tuesday. Otherwise, where we keep that thin layer of cloud in the sky, it's going to be a milder start to the day, 2 to 4 Celsius. But I'm optimistic that through Tuesday we'll see more extensive cloud breaks developing, and that means for parts of the Midlands, Northern England, Wales, central and western Scotland, a reasonable chance of some sunny spells coming through, perhaps even southern England as well. Pleasant enough where that happens, but temperatures a degree or two down compared to Mondays. We're looking at highs of around 4 to 7 Celsius. And then, with those more widespread clear spells into Tuesday night and the start of Wednesday, I think a more widespread frost forming for the start of Wednesday, with temperatures, again, a couple of degrees below freezing, but quite extensively across England, Wales and Scotland, whilst Northern Ireland sees the cloud build and quite early on, outbreaks of rain moving in here. The first signs of a change on the way the middle of this week. Those outbreaks of rain moving in bump into the colder air, and we will see some snow over the Scottish mountains. But otherwise, it looks more unsettled later this week.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
To GB News, the afternoon agenda with me, Alex Phillips. We've got a bumper show coming up for you today, but don't go anywhere. First of all, we've got the news headlines with Polly.
Good afternoon. Senior Cabinet Ministers are meeting to discuss the growing number of COVID cases in the UK and potential measures to curb its spread. Some MPs have reportedly pushed back against calls by scientific advisers for new restrictions before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the Cabinet is said to be reluctant to introduce new measures in the next few days. The government's chief scientific adviser, Sir Patrick Vallance, is urging for tighter rules to prevent the NHS being overwhelmed. Meanwhile, hospitality leaders are calling for emergency financial support in the next 24 hours because of a fall in bookings in the sector. The operator of the Real Greek and Franco Manca restaurant chains says rescue packages are needed now, regardless of whether further COVID measures are introduced. The government says support for businesses is kept under constant review. Meanwhile, the chief executive of the Nighttime Industries Association, Michael Kildow, said The new restrictions are confusing.
We're hugely concerned, not only for the survival of businesses, but people's livelihoods. People that we've committed and managed to build up and gain momentum for this trade is now being stifled massively. COVID passes were presented as a mitigation that would keep nightclubs open. That's clearly not the case. And the concern that we have is at some point leading up to New Year's Eve is going to create some level of displacement. And that could go into things like illegal events or push people back into households, but which we know full well are, highly transmissible.
Well, Labour is also urging more support for businesses through the festive period. It's calling for the reintroduction of sick pay for employees who've tested positive or who have to self-isolate with symptoms.
What you don't want in a situation like this is businesses and workers having to calculate, should we do the right thing here or is there a cost to us? So it's really important that we've got a good sick pay system in place and one that is also helpful to the small businesses involved.
The Deputy Prime Minister has denied his colleagues broke lockdown rules after an image emerged showing the Prime Minister and his staff having cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden during the first national lockdown. The Guardian newspaper released the photograph showing the Prime Minister drinking at a table with Carrie Johnson and 2 others, with 16 other staff members nearby. But Dominic Raab stressed the garden was a place of work and that sometimes staff would have a drink after a long day or a long week at work. Retired teachers are being urged to return to the profession to help with COVID staff shortages in the new year. Some schools are already preparing for the possibility of online learning, but the Education Secretary is appealing for qualified teachers across primary, secondary and further education to return to classrooms to maintain face-to-face teaching. At least 375 people have died and more than 500 are injured following the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year. More than 50 other people are still missing. Officials say several central provinces are struggling with power and communication outages and are pleading for food and water. At its strongest, Typhoon Rai brought winds reaching almost 170 miles an hour. The World Economic Forum has delayed its annual summit in Davos following concerns over the Omicron variant of COVID. The conference, held in the Swiss mountain resort, sees major political and business leaders from around the globe attending. The meeting will instead be held in the early summer. The television presenter Rachel Riley has been awarded £10,000 in damages after winning a libel case against a former aide to Jeremy Corbyn. The Countdown presenter sued Laura Murray over a tweet that was found to be defamatory. At the time, Miss Murray was a manager in the then Labour leader's office. The High Court judge said the tweet, posted more than 2 years ago, had caused serious harm to Rachel Riley's reputation and that she was due vindication. The sandwich chain Pret-a-Manger has been told to consider reviewing its advertising campaign for a £20 a month coffee subscription after reports of complaints from customers. That's the advice from the Advertising Standards Authority. Pret subscribers can choose 5 drinks every day as part of their deal, but customers have said they were often unable to get some drinks on the deal, as many shops said they were unable to make them. That's all from me. You're up to date. Now back to the afternoon agenda.
An autocracy tempered by regicide. That's how William Hague described the Conservative Party, and considering the past 2 prime ministers, well, it's hard to disagree. The Tories seem to have a habit of playing their party leaders like a game of chess. No sooner has a new prime minister been anointed that the game of succession begins. The manoeuvres, the plotting, the leaks and the splits, the whispers and the backbench backroom deals, the WhatsApp groups, the publicity stunts, the late-night texts to journalists and clandestine gatherings in Westminster dining rooms. Since the Tories came back into power, every premiership has ended in an early resignation. The stake through the heart of the resident of number 10 always being Brexit, that backbench headache that just wouldn't go away, threatening to schism the party with every passing political generation. Until along came an analgesic in the form of Boris, promising to get Brexit done in front of party faithfuls applauding like seals, his sycophantic backbenchers finally getting their anti-hero on the throne, the voice of the grassroots represented once again, saving them their precarious seats. Well, here comes the time to insert the record scratch, because history has a funny way of repeating itself. For all of Boris's Brexit bluster, along came COVID, an unprecedented challenge that would divide the nation and pull at the fabric of the self-titled broad church of the Conservative Party all over again. The party whose fault line is freedom itself. From bleating about jettisoning the shackles of Brussels, the true blue libertarians now clamour for freedom from Sage. Somehow, the party of thrift and personal responsibility has transmogrified into a government able to lock people up, force vaccines into veins, and go on a spending spree that would make Louis XIV quite queasy. Yet getting the bad news delivered by a bobbing blonde bonce with electric shock hair, woven with waggish warm wit, made the public far more forgiving, perhaps, of the pain being inflicted upon them. So, over and over again, the cycle of reassurance, the dithering and the denial, the very public reticence disguising private resolve, the 5 p.m. press conferences, the 4 a.m. flights, trapped us all in governance of bipolar madness, 1 week pandering to COVID sceptics, to assuaging science zealots the next. Over and over again, in true British style, we obeyed, with little more than a sigh and a grumble. That was until we realised that some animals are more equal than others, and bon vivant Boris has been presiding over secret soirees and chummy cheese nights, and a roller coaster of botched decisions, leaks and peccadillos soon followed, coaxing out a gentle flurry of resignations and peaking political plotting. Scandals that in normal times would have seen far less result in consequences far greater. So, as Nadine Dorries appears to have been unceremoniously dumped from the WhatsApp group of Tory rebels, the oven-ready Brexit deal got rapidly defrosted to be subsumed under the auspices of Remain voting in Liz We Trust, as Dishy Rishi has fallen suspiciously silenced, commanded, perhaps, to squirrel himself away in the bowels of number 11 after having become too delectable as a potential successor. And, of course, as the infamous 1922 committee once again furtively count their missives from disgruntled Tory Z-listers waiting to reach the threshold for a vote of no confidence, will we be seeing yet another premicide from behind a lectern at the nation's most famous address? Or can Boy Wonder Boris, the greased piglet, Bojo, the human trampoline, add yet another life onto his cat-like survivors tally? Is this really the man to steer the good ship Britain through today's tsunami-streaked seas? Well, today, we really need to talk about leadership. Joining us now is Conservative MP for Lichfield, Michael Fabricant. Michael, are you still supporting your Prime Minister?
I am, Alex. Perhaps because he has got blonde hair. I heard that bit of criticism earlier.
Oh, it's no criticism from a fellow blonde. Don't you worry about that. And mine is, a little bit enabled by the bottle, I'm not going to lie. But he is facing a tough time, isn't he? I mean, there's been a succession now of scandals, peccadillos, U-turns, fibs to Parliament. And now it seems the murmurings of the backbench rebels, the ones who really put him in power and got him to the throne to get Brexit done, is that going to lead to a vote of no confidence?
Well, let me tell you about an experience I had this morning, because it's going to be repeated up and down the country with constituency MPs. I had a wander around Lichfield, had to go in this morning, and I immediately met one guy in the close, the Cathedral Close, and he said to me, "You've got to get rid of that clown Boris." He said, no one's going to vote for you, Michael, if you don't get rid of Boris. And then I saw 3 different people during the course of my wandering around trying to pull some money out of a cash point machine, all of whom said, "You've got to hang on to Boris because the drip, drip, drip is so artificial. It is so mechanical. All these exposés of so-called parties and whatever, there's obviously somebody or some people who are doing it deliberately. And the point that I would make at the moment is, look what's going on as well. And that is, we've got the strongest economy of any large city, of any large country in Europe. And we've also got by far the very best vaccine program in Europe. In fact, some European countries don't even have a booster program. And I want to take this opportunity, by the way, to say to all your viewers, for God's sake, get out there and get a booster.
But, you know, you're talking about the fact that there are people in the shadows sharpening their knives. And it occurs to me that, well, he's clearly not running a very tight ship, giving all of the leaks that keep coming out. And that, to me, suggests a lack of leadership. Is he the right man to be in this position, the most important job in the land?
Well, because, you know, it needs imagination, it needs boldness, and that's what he's got. And look, you know, would Keir Starmer be doing any better? Do you think the people aren't there at the moment, sharpening their knives, waiting for Keir Starmer to stumble? And, you know, this is an unprecedented pandemic. I mean, none of us remember anything like it in our lifetime. I mean, I guess the last time we had anything like this was the flu epidemic after the First World War 100 years ago. And I truly believe that any prime minister would be having problems at the moment, simply because, as you quite rightly said in your monologue to begin with, you know, the Conservative Party is the party of freedom, of liberty, and yet we're having to sort of put down certain conditions in order to protect the vast majority of the population.
Do you think that this is very much a media confected thing going on, this sort of constant Boris bashing, as his fans like to call it? Or do you think that there are things that need to change to make sure that Number 10 is being run professionally and by adults?
Well, I think there's two aspects to this. I mean, I used to work in the media, and if I was being fed photographs and bits of information, of course I'd publish it. I'm not going to not publish it. So I'm not blaming the media. I'm blaming the people who are leaking all this. And I would say the events in themselves, you know, are not necessarily breaking the law anyway. And we've heard all the reasons why. And I'm not going to bore you. However, I will say that while I think Boris is very much in charge, I do wonder sometimes whether all the people at Number 10 are as adult, if you like, as they should be. Maybe they are, maybe they are. And that's something I hope that Boris will be thinking of very carefully, particularly after Lord Frost and his resignation.
Yeah, what do you make of that? Because many people, especially sort of, you know, out of the grassroots political areas, regarded Lord Frost as an ardent Brexiteer, a low-tax economy man, a man who really respects agency and individual freedoms and civil liberties. And to see him go must be a bit of a blow and a pretty sad indictment of, you know, what potentially a lot of people in the Conservative Party are thinking about the governance at the moment.
Well, I was pretty shocked to hear that he'd resigned, to be honest with you. I really rate that guy. But Liz Truss is also a very, very strong Brexiteer. I don't think she is any person who likes high taxes or anything else. But look, you know, this government spent £400 billion in one shot in furlough and other protections to ensure that we didn't have massive unemployment as they have on the continent, and it's got to be paid back somehow. And to give you an idea of how big 400 billion is, well, I'm no supporter of HS2. That's about 100 billion over the space of about 8, 9, 10 years, billion spent over the period of just a few months. So it was inevitable that taxes were going to rise, but I'm pretty sure that Rishi is very keen that they go down as soon as possible.
Has he been made to fall down an elevator shaft recently, do you think? It seems to me at one point we were all chatting about Rishi a little too much and he's gone a little bit quiet on the public stage.
Well, I mean, it's not for me to judge what Rishi's doing, but he probably thinks there are enough distractions at the moment without him making statements that aren't relevant to his particular area of expertise, which of course is the Treasury. So I welcome that. I mean, there are too many people. I see people from the 1922 committee going on television and criticising the Prime Minister. And I just think, oh, come on, you know. I'd like to see them trying to run the country in this unprecedented situation. And indeed, as I say, where we have lower unemployment, more in employment than there has been actually since before COVID. You've got France and Germany and Italy just envying that economic situation. And most of those countries haven't even started doing both booster shots yet. And I believe that as of this morning, 53% of the adult population have now had their booster shot, which is an incredible achievement.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. You definitely put a smile on my face on this Monday. Always delightful talking to you. You bring so much energy, humour and warmth. Michael Fabricant, who's the MP for Lichfield. Well, joining us now is Ben Harris-Quinney, who's chairman of the Bow Group, which is a Conservative think tank. Now, Ben, where do you think Boris Johnson stands in his own party right now? Is he in trouble or is he going to survive this?
I think he's on a precipice. My sense is that he will survive, but he's got to change tack very quickly on a number of issues. I think he'll survive because a lot of people have asked me this, you know, who would you like to succeed Boris Johnson? And I think the real problem there is the Conservative Party since 2005 has been hollowed out and filled with Liberals, and there are very few Conservatives left, and the complaint that a lot of people have is that we voted for a Conservative Party and we didn't get one. You know, we want to see a Conservative Party that does Conservative things, and I don't honestly see many people that could take the mantle from Boris Johnson and lead it in a Conservative direction. He is clearly leading the party in a very liberal direction, or some would even say socialist direction, based on some of the restrictions and economic measures he has brought forward. But I think he will survive because there isn't that obvious challenger, particularly from the right. But as Michael Fabricant said, I think there needs to be, or he alluded to the fact that there is a question about how many adults there are in number 10. We've called for an inquiry into the role of the Prime Minister's wife, much publicised her spat with Dominic Cummings, and that really shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be happening in any country, but it shouldn't be happening in a country like Britain, where you have someone that is unconstitutionally involved in running it and unaccountable. So I think Boris needs to take the message, clear out number 10, perhaps get some old wise hands in that can steer the government in a much more stable direction.
It does seem to me that they've been having a jolly good time, haven't they, in number 10, according to the pictures, of course, posted in The Guardian today. But do you think that means he's not being a good leader? If he's got a coterie around him who people like you cannot take seriously and are worried about, that suggests to me that, you know, he's not really made to be a boss.
No, I mean, those questions have been asked about Boris Johnson throughout his entire career. Is he serious enough? And no, I don't think he is. But if you have someone alongside him, or several people alongside him that play that serious role, I think that it can rumble on a little longer. But that's all we're really talking about. You know, I think we've got to remember the context as well. The Conservative Party, Boris Johnson hasn't, but the Conservative Party have been in power for 11 years, and we've had this constant recycling. David Cameron was supposed to be someone that was going to take on Blair. He very quickly dubbed himself as the heir to Blair. I remember campaigning in 2010 and doing lots of things to get the Blair-Brown government out, and we ended up with just another Tony Blair. Then, of course, he went, and the Brexit movement flourished, which I know that you were a big part of as well. And we were supposed to get a Brexit government, and what we got was a Remainer in Theresa May. Of course, that turned out to be a disaster. And then Boris was supposed to come along and save the day, and we have the same problem just a few years later. So I think there's that much deeper problem in the Conservative Party. And I think the Conservative Party needs to urgently reconnect with its grassroots base and with the ideology of conservatism. But I also think that we have now a constellation of parties on the right: Reform, Reclaim, Heritage. The SDP is now operating on the social conservative side of the spectrum. And I think those parties need to come together and form a challenge to the government in the same way that UKIP and the Brexit Party did, to focus the minds of the government and to pull it back to conservatism. And what we've seen in recent by-election results is these sorts of parties getting 6-7% in the polls if you put them all together. And I think if they can all come together under a single leader, then we can start to get some proper opposition, because the Labour Party clearly incapable of doing so, and then we can start to hold the government to account and perhaps improve the government, because that was always the point of opposition and why our structure is the way it is that opposition is there to scrutinise government, to improve government for the country. So I would encourage all of those disparate parties on the right to realise that individually they can do nothing, but collectively they can do a lot, and come together and form that union.
It's interesting, when you mention conservatism there, for most people, when they think of conservatism, they think of Margaret Thatcher. And she, of course, famously said that she wasn't a conciliatory leader, she was a conviction leader. Boris doesn't seem to be the same, though. There have been so many screeching U-turns. Does he have conviction? Does he have a real belief that he wants to see through to create a legacy? Or is he guided a little bit too much by polls and reputation?
Well, I think the problem is, we for a very long time, and the Brexit vote was a vote against the metropolitan liberal cabal that has governed this country for almost the entirety of my life since Margaret Thatcher left office, pretty much. Now, the problem is with Boris Johnson, he is an avowed liberal. He's talked about it many times. He's not a conservative. He has very clearly explained that he's not a conservative. When it suited him, he pretended to be conservative, and that's how he found his way to leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. So he does have some values, but he's had to pretend to be something he isn't, and then he's had many other things laid upon him by SAGE and government advisors, and indeed, as I said before, it would appear his girlfriend and now wife. And so I think he's even lost a commitment to liberal politics. I'm a conservative. I think we need to get the liberal metropolitan lot out. But at least the liberal metropolitan lot might balk at things like vaccine passports. But we don't even have that. And I think it's the old adage that the problem is with people that believe in nothing is that they will believe in anything. And Boris seems to be swinging from issue to issue in a way that I would say, on almost every major broad brush area of policy, this Conservative government, and indeed recent Conservative governments, have operated to the left of Tony Blair's government. They've almost tripled the national debt. Tax is higher than it has been since the Second World War. On social policy, woke flourished under the Conservative Party. They've embedded Stonewall and groups like that and given them huge amounts of government money and embedded them in government departments. And so I don't see where the conservatism is, and I don't even see where it's to the right of, as I say, that previous Blair government. So we need a total realignment, I think, in British politics. Not because it's what I want, but it is what I want, but it's very clearly what the public want. That's what they wanted in voting Brexit. They wanted a change, and we haven't had that change. We've had an establishment that has morphed and tried to pretend to be Brexiteers. You were mentioning Liz Truss earlier. Liz Truss is someone who was a Liberal Democrat Remainer, and Cameron forced her through candidate selection. This isn't going to be the answer to achieving the Conservative results that the country clearly wants. So I think we need a realignment of Conservative parties. We need people that want that to come together and maybe put a few egos aside. And we also need the Conservative Party to recognise why people voted for them. And it certainly wasn't for this.
Ben Harris-Quinney, thank you so much. That's chairman of the Bow Group there. Of course, we haven't got any right of reply from Carrie Johnson, so let's just park that in our minds right now. We don't know what influence she exercises over the Prime Minister, as I want to always defend people who are not here to give us their side of the story. Just wanted to make that point. Well, we're going to be continuing this conversation throughout the show. And as per usual, I want to know what you, the viewer, thinks. Email me, gbnews@gbnews.uk. You can also tweet me at gbnews. And we've stuck a poll up, as we always do. Today, we're asking, is Boris Johnson still the best politician to lead our country? Cast your vote so I get an inkling of what you, the nation, really thinks. Now, after the break, almost 1,200 migrants have crossed the Channel in the past 4 days as criminal people smugglers take advantage of the calm seas and deep fog. We're going to get the latest from that from our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White. But first, here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. We keep a lot of cloud in the sky, I think, during the next 24 hours, but by the start of Tuesday, there is an increasing chance of cloud breaks in some places, leading to a frosty start, but a good chance of sunshine by the afternoon. Here's the area of high pressure that's been keeping us dry, settled, but also mostly cloudy during the last few days. Now, during Monday, some slightly less moist air drifted in from the east, and that's led to those cloud bases lifting a touch and a better chance of breaks developing within the cloud. But these breaks are always quite tenuous and difficult to pinpoint, so a good chance across central and western parts of the country that we'll start off with those cloud breaks and a touch of frost in places on Tuesday morning. But in general, we keep a lot of cloud, I think, particularly in the east and in the south. And again, we'll see a lot of that cloud drift around during Tuesday itself. But you can see some reasonable cloud breaks and sunshine developing during the afternoon across parts of central and western England into Wales, western Scotland as well. A pleasant enough day where we get some sunshine coming through at last. Otherwise, mostly it's cloudy and it's feeling cold, 5, 6, 7 Celsius, about as high as those temperatures will get. And then with the chance of those more extensive cloud breaks by the end of Tuesday, we go into the start of Wednesday with the fairly widespread frost, I think, across Scotland, England and Wales, particularly away from towns and cities, temperatures dipping a degree or so below freezing. But for Northern Ireland, it's milder as cloud rolls in here and the first signs of a change on the way midweek. Outbreaks of rain, a wet start for Northern Ireland, and then those outbreaks of rain pushing into southwestern Scotland by the afternoon, as well as Wales and southwest England. Some heavy rain for a time, and that moves into the colder air further east. So there's the chance of some snow on the tops of the Pennines and Scottish mountains, but it turns milder and wetter in the south.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinions. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. You're watching the afternoon agenda and there's lots more still to come. But first, let's take a look at what you've been saying about leadership. Dave says, I'm a Conservative voter, but Boris is dead in the water and he can't come back from this. But who will replace him? Joan says, leave the man alone. No rules stated you couldn't have cheese and wine. Those people have been working together all week, so classed as a bubble, surely. Just give us proper facts. Stop this nonsense nitpicking. Robert says, Boris is nowhere near a leader. It's time for him to go. Keep your thoughts coming in. But first, let's get another look at the news headlines.
Thanks, Alex. I'm Polly Middlehurst, and here are your GB News headlines. Cabinet ministers are right now meeting to discuss the latest situation and potential measures around COVID-19. Some have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisors for new restrictions to come into force before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the cabinet is said to be reluctant to introduce new measures over the coming days. The Deputy Prime Minister has denied his colleagues broke lockdown rules after an image emerged showing the Prime Minister and his staff having cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden during the first national lockdown. The Guardian newspaper released the photograph showing the Prime Minister drinking at a table with his wife and two others, with other staff members nearby. But Dominic Raab stressed the garden was a place of work and that sometimes staff would have a drink after a long day or a long week. At least 375 people have died and more than 500 more are injured following the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year. More than 50 are still missing. Officials say severe central provinces are struggling with power and are desperately seeking food and water. And here, the Advertising Standards Agency has told the sandwich chain Pret a Manger it should consider reviewing its £20 a month coffee subscription. As part of the deal, Pret subscribers can choose to have 5 drinks every day, including smoothies. Customers, though, are complaining they're often not available, with many shops saying they can't make them. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back at the top of the hour. See you then.
Thank you, Polly. Now, more than 270 migrants arrived at the port of Dover on Border Force boats yesterday. So far this year, almost 28,000 people have arrived in the UK on small boats, 3 times as many as last year. Well, I'm joined by GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, why have so many been making that Channel crossing right now, especially in, well, it's winter? It's got to be difficult conditions.
Well, we've had a break in the weather. We had 10 days or so where the weather was pretty horrendous, and now those weather conditions have just opened up really within about the last 4 or 5 days, allowing migrants to come across in significant numbers. I was down there last Wednesday. Spent Wednesday, Thursday and Friday down there, and the boats were coming, so about 1,200 in the last few days. Here's some of what I saw on Friday. It's incredible to think we're more than halfway through the month of December now, and still these small boats are coming across the English Channel. Throughout this morning, Border Force and RNLI lifeboats have been involved in intercepting numerous small boats in the Channel. Here, one of the Border Force vessels now returning to the port of Dover. Effectively, what they do is they head up and down the Channel to different incidents, responding, taking the migrants on shore. You can see migrants at the front of the Border Force vessel as it comes in. This is the Border Force vessel Alert. Some migrants at the back of this vessel as well. They have achieved what they set out to achieve, of course, which is to be picked up by UK authorities and taken here to Dover to be entered into the UK asylum system. And that was the Border Force vessel Alert that came back into Dover Harbour on Friday with some of the migrants who were on that vessel. Another development on this story, we've been hearing of lawsuits that are now being brought by charities and by some members of the families of those who died last month, 27 who died in the Channel. Accusing the maritime authorities in the UK and in France actually of not doing enough to rescue their loved ones. And so they are taking that to a court of law. I think that will probably infuriate a lot of people, given that it wasn't those maritime authorities that encouraged these people to go out into these very unsafe inflatable boats into the English Channel in such conditions. Quite the opposite. In fact, they've been warning for some considerable time about the very real dangers of doing just that, Alex.
Now, we have another developing story in the media at the moment about the sad case of missing Harvey Parker. What's the latest there?
This is a very worrying case, I have to say. This is a young man, 20 years old, from London, from the Lambeth area, a student at York University. Now, he was at the Heaven nightclub in London on Thursday night into the early hours of Friday morning. He left that club, and he left that club alone, according to witnesses. He hasn't been seen since. He's never been on his mobile phone to contact his family. Police have been trying to make contact with him on his phone as well, and they've just had no communication. They say there's nothing in his character to explain why he would suddenly disappear like this. The Metropolitan Police are saying that they are very concerned now for this young man's safety, given the period of time that has passed since he left that nightclub and has not been seen. Nothing overtly to suggest that he's come to harm, but you've got to understand the concern after such a period of time with a young man who normally would have no reason not to be in contact with his family and friends, not reaching out and making contact.
Yeah, Mark, thank you for that update, and do keep us in the loop about what goes on there. Well, Labour is urging more support for businesses through the festive period. We're going to be talking about that as they're calling for the reintroduction of sick pay for employees who've tested positive or have to self-isolate with symptoms. First of all, here's the break. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is the UK's new chief Brexit negotiator, replacing Lord Frost, who resigned over the weekend over concerns about the current direction of travel of the government. Truss, who voted Remain in 2016, will face the task of reigniting talks with the EU and resolving the stalemate over Northern Ireland. Well, joining me now is Reform UK leader and co-founder of Leave.eu, Richard Tice. Richard, how do you feel about the resignation of Lord Frost? I mean, many of us considered him to be the right man, really, to oversee that job. After all of the watering down and diluting of Brexit, of course, we're MEPs together during the Theresa May era. Suddenly it felt like we had a man who really wanted to do it the right way, all in, and he's gone.
I know. I was really shocked and actually very sad, because the truth is he understood the detail. And yes, he was involved in negotiating it. We all knew that it wasn't perfect, but that was Theresa May's fault. But here he is, he's now gone, not actually just because of the way of the Northern Ireland Protocol negotiations, but also because of his concerns about the political direction of the government. That's a whole different story. But this appointment of Liz Truss as the lead negotiator is, in my view, a disaster. She's the Foreign Secretary. She may be a great Foreign Secretary, but that covers the whole world. She's a very busy person. She's also, of course, Minister for Women and Equalities. So she's got a huge amount on her plate. And this requires total focus. My concern is that the EU will see this as a weak appointment, someone who is not prepared to walk away. And we know that if you're not prepared to walk away, as Theresa May wasn't, you end up being completely legged over by the EU. Whereas actually there were real concerns in the EU that Lord Frost was prepared to trigger Article 16. So I think this is a weak appointment. There's clearly some politics in it. Boris is sort of, he's trying to sort of suggest, I suspect, is he trying to put Liz Truss into a really difficult place where she might get something wrong and fail, and therefore that sort of props him up a bit? Not quite sure, but in terms of the negotiations of this critical issue about the Northern Ireland Protocol, I think it's a weak appointment. I think the EU will see it as weak. They won't think that she's prepared to trigger Article 16, and I think that's very bad, not just for Northern Ireland, but actually also for the fishing negotiations. And the minister underneath appointed Chris Heaton-Harris. Look, a nice guy, but he's not a John Redwood. He's not a Steve Baker. It's one of those sort of people who should have been appointed, because that, from Boris's point of view, would have brought in people from the right of the party, someone, real true believers in a proper, hard Brexit negotiation. That would have been much smarter and much better for the country. But then again, this is Boris. What do we expect?
There will be people out there who say, a great deal of that deal's already been done. Yes, there are sort of, the sort of Damocles hanging over us as a result of the Northern Irish Protocol and those ongoing tensions with France when it comes to fishing as well. But as Foreign Secretary, she is now dealing with the EU, which is a composite of foreign countries. And as previous trade minister, some would say that the legacy of Brexit, is being able to make trade negotiations and actually having the freedom to act completely unilaterally and do what we want, how we want with bespoke agreements, and not be overshadowed by being tied to the EU. So perhaps she's actually in an extraordinarily unique and pivotal position, and therefore the best person for the job.
But she's just come from being the trade negotiator for trade deals all over the world, including in Asia and including with the US and Australia. Trade negotiations take a lot of time, a lot of focus, a lot of effort. And she's got a huge number of other things on her plate. There's relations with China, with Russia, issues around Taiwan, issues in the Middle East. And indeed issues with the US and Joe Biden. So she's just got so much on her plate. And I think we've all got real concerns, frankly, about the quality and the competence of the people in the Foreign Office. We saw the absolute shambles when Dominic Raab was there with regard to the evacuation from Afghanistan. So no, I've got real concerns about this. I think this is a slippery slope. I don't think it's good for our negotiations with the EU, and I don't think it's good for the country.
How much does it matter to you that she didn't back Brexit in the referendum? There are people out there who say, oh no, she's an ardent Brexiteer, she did that.
I think we've got to get over that. She believes in our country. I'm quite sure she loves our country and she's a real patriot and she will do the best that she can. But I just don't think that it's possible for her to do all of these roles in a really focused, diligent, determined way, and in a sense have the time to make the right calls. And look, to trigger Article 16 requires a real understanding of all the issues involved, and it is sensitive, it is difficult. It requires courage and a total 110% focus. Lord Frost had that. I fear that Liz Truss, as Foreign Secretary, she's being pulled from pillar to post. It's just, I have a real concern. It's just not possible. I just don't think that the other minister, Chris Heaton-Harris, I just don't think that he's really a strong enough person for it. He's got no track record of being a proper, tough negotiator, someone who understands the world of business, like, for example, Sir John Redwood, who really gets this. And look, the other side have got to believe you're going to pull the trigger and you're going to walk away on Article 16 in order to get a result. I said in mid-October that Lord Frost should have set a deadline in mid-November for the end of these negotiations. Here we are, we're in mid-December, it's going to drift into the new year, and I think the EU are going to think this can go on and on and on, and we can just quietly grind them down, and that's a terrible place to be negotiating from.
I mean, now, of course, for Brexiteers like us, it's not just about leaving the EU, it's what we do with that blank canvas. It's the excitement of having a tabula rasa on which to draw our nation's future. Do you worry, perhaps, that the Conservative Party have now got Brexit done nominally, saved their bacon, banked it, and now they don't care about reaping all of the dividends that we could get from it?
There are elements of the Conservative Party that clearly do, but the truth is that they are Conservative in name only. The reality is, I've invented this word con-socialist, and that's actually what the majority of the party now is. There's hardly a whiskers difference between them and the Labour Party. They're the party of high tax, high regulation, nanny state, and that leads to low growth, and we've just seen that recently. So, no, we need, Brexit is a huge opportunity. We all know that. So many Brexiteers know that. But you've got to have the courage to use that opportunity. You've got to cut taxes. You've got to be smartly regulated. You've got to go for growth. All of these things. That's the big opportunity. Because guess what? That'll create higher wages for the least well off, higher growth for smaller businesses, and that creates the revenues to invest in public services. This is basic economics that seems to have been completely forgotten by the majority of the Conservative Party, who I fear never did even O-level economics, let alone A-level economics.
Now, people to say that it helps keep the Conservatives honest by having Nigel Farage nipping at their heels. Are you the man to take on that mantle now he's one of us at GB News?
I think there's loads of us, and we're not going to let them, in a sense, sell us down the river. And we'll all keep, banging in the drum, and we'll all keep making a noise when they get things wrong. And I fear that, in a sense, we've got this great opportunity, but let's, for heaven's sake, use it. The last thing in the world we want to become is a boring, highly taxed European social democracy. I mean, after all the pain and angst that we all suffered during all of this period, for heaven's sake, let's now maximise that opportunity on the global stage. And in fairness, Liz Truss, doing the trade negotiations, was, I think, doing a confident, optimistic, bullish job about that. She's moved to Foreign Secretary. She's got all sorts of other responsibilities. We need a tough person there. And look, they could still change it. They could still appoint a John Redwood type person to come in and be, the hard person doing this negotiation. And we've got to keep banging the drum and not let them get away with it.
Absolutely. Richard, lovely to see you. Lovely to have you in the studio.
Thank you.
Richard Tice there, who, of course, is the leader of Reform. Well, we'll be back after a short break and the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. We keep a lot of cloud in the sky, I think, during the next 24 hours, but by the start of Tuesday, there is an increasing chance of cloud breaks in some places, leading to a frosty start, but a good chance of sunshine by the afternoon. Here's the area of high pressure that's been keeping us dry, settled, but also mostly cloudy during the last few days. Now, during Monday, some slightly less moist air drifted in from the east, and that's led to those cloud bases lifting a touch and a better chance of breaks developing within the cloud. But these breaks are always quite tenuous and difficult to pinpoint, so a good chance across central and western parts of the country that we'll start off with those cloud breaks and a touch of frost in places on Tuesday morning. But in general, we keep a lot of cloud, I think, particularly in the east and in the south. And again, we'll see a lot of that cloud drift around during Tuesday itself. But you can see some reasonable cloud breaks and sunshine developing during the afternoon across parts of central and western England into Wales, western Scotland as well. A pleasant enough day where we get some sunshine coming through at last. Otherwise, mostly it's cloudy and it's feeling cold, 5, 6, 7 Celsius, about as high as those temperatures will get. And then, with the chance of those more extensive cloud breaks by the end of Tuesday, we go into the start of Wednesday with the fairly widespread frost, I think, across Scotland, England and Wales, particularly away from towns and cities, temperatures dipping a degree or so below freezing. But for Northern Ireland, it's milder as cloud rolls in here and the first signs of a change on the way midweek. Outbreaks of rain, a wet start for Northern Ireland, and then those outbreaks of rain pushing into southwestern Scotland by the afternoon, as well as Wales and southwest England. Some heavy rain for a time, and that moves into the colder air further east. So there's the chance of some snow on the tops of the Pennines and Scottish mountains, but it turns milder and wetter in the south.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
It's estimated the cancellation of bookings in Scotland could cost the hospitality industry over £1 billion. It comes as new restrictions came into force to ensure social distancing and advice not to go out by the Scottish Government. Our Scotland reporter Davy Donaldson has more.
Empty seats in venues, a sight that is being replicated across Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. The Linlithgow Rose Social Club has had to cancel 3 sold-out evenings between now and Hogmanay due to the rules regarding social distancing. How much do you reckon this cost the club?
We're certainly way in 5 figures. Way in 5 figures.
I mean, that is a huge, huge loss, for especially for an organisation like this.
Yes, especially at this time of the year where, and obviously everything that's went on with the 2 previous lockdowns, it's very, very disappointing.
How difficult is it to continue, or is that just something you can't think about at the moment?
Going forward, we have various things. There's already been a birthday party cancelled the first week in January for the same reasons, and we're not confident of things taking place after that.
A few miles away, the Corby Inn in Bowness has seen bookings cancelled, which means a loss of revenue during the busiest time of the year.
Well, so far, as over the last couple of days, we've had, since the advisory to stop mixing, we've had 120 cancellations so far to date. So our rules have never changed. So we've just since the whole pandemic, we just followed the whole rules and we haven't changed them or relaxed them in any way because we try to protect ourselves as well as our customers.
The Linlithgow Rose Social Club have been bringing hundreds of people back due to cancelling their festive nights. They were hoping to make some money after a tough couple of years and believe others are also affected.
The £37 included money that was going to be made for the social club, much needed revenue, especially with everything that's been going on. And obviously it's been the knock-on effect by caterers, cabaret artists and everybody that's been affected by this. And plus obviously ourselves with the amount of money that would be taken over the bar.
A lot of businesses in the hospitality sector are clearly feeling the pinch as the Omicron virus spreads quickly, and with First Minister Nicola Sturgeon advising people not to go out before Christmas, it's another huge loss in revenue.
Yeesh, not looking good for you North of Hadrian's Wall. Well, today we are talking about leadership. I'm asking, is Boris Johnson still the best politician to lead the country? And lots of you have been getting in touch. Linda says, I think if Boris brings in more coronavirus restrictions, that could be the end for him. If he rejects further restrictions, I'll support him. William says, he's fine, better than any other politician. Yes, he's made mistakes, but who hasn't? Let's back him. James says, we should replace him with Liz Truss. She has been given a chance until the election. Sharon says, he is the best of a bad lot, simply because he is not as dangerous as others waiting to oust him. But my real opinion is we should be governed by the people and not the elites. Lee says, Dishy Rishi is the man for me. He's done a great job throughout the pandemic. Craig says, wouldn't choose him to lead a drunken pub sing-song. Oh, I would. I bet he'd be good at that, let alone anything else. He seems to be good at being a quizmaster too, so we hear. Trouble is, I wouldn't choose any of the others either. Now, keep your thoughts coming in. I'd love to hear from you. Loads more coming up throughout the show, and we're going to get more from experts after 5 o'clock, so don't go anywhere. You're watching The Afternoon Agenda, and there's more to come. Well, hello and welcome. If you've just joined The Afternoon Agenda on this wonderful morning on GB News. Morning, I meant Monday. I'm Alex Phillips. This show isn't about news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are or should be on your agenda. Who can tell I've just come back from holiday, eh? Still to come this hour. 6 out of 10 Premier League games this weekend were postponed as a result of coronavirus cases. This afternoon, a special Premier League shareholders meeting is taking place to discuss the impact it's having on the sport. I'll be joined by former England manager, no one else but Sam Allardyce. The trial of Ghislaine Maxwell on sex trafficking charges will hear its closing arguments today in Manhattan. We'll be getting the latest. And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but we really need to talk about leadership. Is Boris Johnson still the best man to lead our country? That's the agenda for the next hour, but do tell me what's on yours. Keep those emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can, of course, also tweet me @gbnews, and don't forget to vote in the poll we stick up every day on the afternoon agenda. But first, let's take a breath. It's time for the news headlines with Polly.
Good evening, your news at 5 o'clock. Senior cabinet ministers are meeting in Downing Street to discuss the growing number of COVID cases and potential measures to curb its spread in England. Some MPs have reportedly pushed back against calls by the government's scientific advisers for new restrictions to come into force before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the cabinet is said to be reluctant to introduce new measures in the coming days. The government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, is urging for tighter rules to prevent the NHS being overwhelmed. Meanwhile, hospitality leaders are calling for emergency financial support in the next 24 hours following a dramatic fall in bookings. The operator of the Real Greek and Franco Manca restaurant chain says rescue packages are needed regardless of whether further COVID measures are introduced. The government says support for businesses is kept under constant review. Meanwhile, the chief executive of the Nighttime Industries Association told GB News the new restrictions are confusing.
we're hugely concerned, not only for the survival of businesses, but people's livelihoods, people that we've committed and managed to build up and gain momentum for this trade is now being stifled massively. COVID passes were presented as a mitigation that would keep nightclubs open. That's clearly not the case. And the concern that we have is at some point leading up to New Year's Eve is going to create some level of displacement. And that could go into things like illegal events or push people back into households, but which we know full well are, highly transmissible.
Well, Labour's also urging more support for businesses throughout the festive period. It's calling for the reintroduction of sick pay for employees who've tested positive or who have to self-isolate with symptoms. The Deputy Prime Minister has denied his colleagues broke lockdown rules after an image emerged showing the Prime Minister and his staff having cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden during the first national lockdown. The Guardian newspaper released the photograph showing the Prime Minister drinking at a table with Carrie Johnson and 2 others and 16 other staff members nearby. But Dominic Raab stressed the garden was a place of work and that sometimes staff would have a drink after a long day or a long week. The Conservative MP for Lichfield, Michael Fabricant, believes the Prime Minister hasn't actually done anything wrong.
I truly believe that any Prime Minister would be having problems at the moment. If I was being fed photographs and bits of information, of course I'd publish it. I'm not going to not publish it. So I'm not blaming the media. I'm blaming the people who are leaking all this. And I would say the events in themselves, are not necessarily breaking the law anyway. Boris is very much in charge. I do wonder sometimes whether all the people at Number 10 are as adult, if you like, as they should be.
Well, retired teachers are being urged to return to the profession to help with COVID staff shortages in the new year. Some schools are already preparing for the possibility of online learning. But the Education Secretary is appealing for qualified teachers across primary, secondary and further education to consider returning to the classroom to maintain face-to-face teaching. Away from COVID, at least 375 people have died and more than 500 more are injured following the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year. More than 50 other people are still missing. Officials are saying several central provinces are still struggling with power and communication outages, and they're pleading for food and water. At its strongest, Typhoon Rai brought winds reaching almost 170 miles an hour. The World Economic Forum has delayed its annual summit in Davos following concerns over the Omicron variant of COVID. The conference, held in the Swiss mountain resort, sees major political and business leaders from around the globe attending. The meeting will instead be held in the early summer. The television presenter Rachel Riley has been awarded £10,000 in damages after winning a libel case against a former aide to Jeremy Corbyn. The Countdown presenter sued Laura Murray over a tweet that was found to be defamatory. At the time, Miss Murray was a manager in the then Labour leader's office. The High Court judge said the tweet posted more than 2 years ago did cause serious harm to Rachel Riley's reputation, and she was due vindication. The sandwich chain Pret-a-Manger has been told to consider reviewing its advertising campaign for a £20 a month coffee subscription after reports of complaints from customers. That's the advice from the Advertising Standards Authority. Pret subscribers can choose 5 drinks every day as part of the deal, but customers have complained that they were often unable to get smoothies on the deal, as many shops said they were unable to make them. You're up to date. I'll bring you the latest headlines in half an hour. Until then, it's back to the afternoon agenda.
Well, the court of King Boris is messy indeed. From Dominic, the Baron of Barnard Castle, jousting with the harem of Princess Nut-Nut, naughty knaves whispering secrets in dark corners, the troublesome priest Patterson guillotined at the 11th hour in front of an angry mob, while young pretender Rishi flashes a £1 trillion debt toothsome grin, one has to wonder what on earth is going on in Number 10. Are decisions being taken using that giant spinning arrow from a claret-splattered discarded game of Twister, left over from last year's Crimbo Bash? Are policies being fired out of a ball feeder to be ricocheted away days later in a game of governmental whiff-waff? Who leaked that video and those photographs to a salivating media? Who is the secret Scrooge? Is it Whitty in the lab with the poison test tube? Or is it Rishi wielding the giant-sized charity cheque? Or Sajid and his sorcerers on stage? Or perhaps behind it all is Boris in the library, quoting Ovid about COVID. Who really is running the country? And more important still, should they be? Today, as the Prime Minister's back is once again reportedly on the ropes, we really need to talk about leadership. Well, joining me first is Matt Goodwin, a Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Kent. Matt, great to have you. You're probably the one out there, the most preeminent political analyst who gets the idea of the left behinds, a coin that you termed and a cohort of voters that Boris really relies upon. So do you think his ratings have been significantly impacted over the last month, and can he survive?
Boris Johnson has been losing the very voters who put him into power in 2019. If you look at why the Conservatives are struggling in the polls today, it's those typically Leave voting folks who are leaving the Conservative Party. Their support is down. They're not switching to Labour, by the way, Alex. They're just saying now they're not going to vote at the next election. They've sort of given up on this idea that Boris Johnson was the alternative that they craved from that old consensus in British politics. So right now, they're giving up. They're just walking away. And I think the jury is out as to whether Boris Johnson can win them back.
Now, is this more about parties, as in Christmas parties, or is this about policies here, do you think?
Well, I'm pretty convinced that this is about a lot more than what we've seen going on in number 10. I think if we take our minds back to 2019, the people who voted for Johnson felt that he'd really do three things. He'd deliver Brexit and make it a success. He'd get control over migration, which was out of control, and he'd level up those left behind regions and towns. And I think fast forward to today, many of those voters, those Leave voters, often very working class voters from outside of London, from outside of the university towns, I think they've looked at Boris and thought, well, yes, he's delivered Brexit, but actually he's not really done that much else. Levelling up is not really been defined. The white paper has been kicked into next year. Immigration certainly is not under control. And Brexit, yes, it's been delivered, but it's not really been made the most out of. And we've now got the biggest tax increases really that we've seen for decades, and a big state, a massive expansion of the state that I think has left a lot of these voters asking themselves, is this really the alternative that we voted for in 2019?
People say that, when it comes to politics, trust comes into it a lot. Do you think that most people are now losing trust in Boris? And because maybe they regard him as essentially doing government by soundbite, constant promises, constant quips and puns and three-word slogans, but show us the receipts. Do you think that really is what's going on here?
I think there's a part of that. I think Boris is still a very appealing, very charismatic, very popular politician. I know you and I will remember, Alex, from the days of the referendum and even before then, when you saw Boris Johnson on the campaign trail, he does have a connection with people that a lot of other politicians don't have. But since he's come into number 10, and I think actually this gets to the point about the people around him in number 10, he's sort of been, diluted. He's been muted. The Boris Johnson that is Prime Minister is not really the Boris Johnson that was anti-establishment, that was pro-Brexit, that was willing to go up against the consensus. And he's sort of become quite establishment in a way in terms of many of the policies that he's been pursuing and some of the ones that he's just not pursuing. And so I think the number 10 party, the sense of unfairness that is running through the country, that certainly matters. It's a big deal. But actually behind that, there's this sense that the Johnson project has just sort of come unstuck, and it's no longer really serving the people that made it possible in the first place.
I mean, he's survived a lot, hasn't he, compared to previous prime ministers? The amount of sort of peccadillos and scandals that have amassed over the course of the last, 12 months or so, particularly when it comes to the way he perhaps handled the Owen Paterson situation, where at first he wanted to seemingly chastise the regulator before forcing the man to resign. Do you think, were it not for the force of nature of his personality and that appeal that he has, you can't look at Boris Johnson without sort of a little smile crossing your face, do you think he would have survived otherwise?
Probably not. But the interesting thing I think about Johnson at the moment is just the number of unnecessary errors that he's making. The Owen Paterson debacle and the by-election that followed, the biggest the second biggest swing in history from the Conservatives to the Lib Dems. All of that was completely unnecessary. The court of Boris Johnson in number 10 is badly managed. It's fairly incoherent. There's not much discipline. There's no intellectual program to Johnsonism. There's no real coherence to what he's trying to do. And I think if you go back to, say, Thatcher in the late 70s and the 80s, and whatever your personal view about Thatcher, the one thing that she did have, she had a group of serious heavyweight thinkers around her who gave her a political program and a coherency and a vision that she could pursue in power. Johnson doesn't have that. He's sort of been winging it from one crisis to another. And as a consequence, also framed by the fact that he wasn't a Westminster insider, he doesn't have a big faction behind him, then the moment he's hit these crises, it's all rapidly come unstuck because he hasn't got that bulletproof vest, he hasn't got that army of fanatical supporters in Parliament. And he needs now to come into 22 and get this number 10 in order. New advisors, new discipline, new message. He needs to reboot his premiership, otherwise he won't be there for much longer.
I mean, one thing that strikes me is there seems to be an awful lot of people sharpening their knives against him. There's either one chatty rat, to coin a phrase that became ever so popular last year, who's leaking all of this stuff to the press, or a number of them. But that's been something that seems to have blighted his premiership from the get-go. Is that because his feel-good factor is actually a bit of a mirage, or is it because he doesn't really have the competence of a leader able to drag a team together and keep them together and enforce discipline?
I think it's a bit of all of that. I think on top of that, Alex, I'd probably argue that by being an anti-establishment outsider, which Boris was because he campaigned for Brexit, he then said, he thought we should deliver it and we should try and make it a success. That did put him on the other side of much of the civil service, much of the media, much of the ruling class. And that is also why Boris Johnson is so unpopular in parts of SW1. Many of the things that we're seeing over recent weeks are still really proxy battles over Brexit. The disillusioned Remainer Conservatives who are coming out again to criticise Boris Johnson, Anna Soubry, for example. The Brexit war lives on. But on top of that are these unnecessary errors that Boris Johnson has allowed to happen. And that flows from the fact that his premiership is not very well organised. He doesn't have the people around him who are loyal, who will go into battle for him and who will give his project a sense of purpose and coherence. It's not too late for Johnson, I don't think, Alex. I think he could come out in 22 and say, look, I'm listening to you, I'm listening to the Red Wall, I'm listening to blue-collar Britain, I'm listening to the Left Behind, and I'm saying, I get it. I've made mistakes, I've made errors. This hasn't been the best 2 years. I'm going to change my premiership. I'm going to switch things around. Whether he can do that, whether he wants to do that, I think remains to be seen. It's not too late, but he's got to take action very quickly.
Yeah, I kind of hope he does, Matt, lovely speaking to you. Matt Goodwin there, who I count as one of the greatest minds when it comes to political analysts. So we're lucky to have him taking part in this discussion today. I'm also joined by Sean Worth, who's a former Conservative advisor and another fantastic political analyst. Sean, when Boris Johnson took over as Prime Minister and took up residence in number 10, the approval rating was pretty low, but he dragged that up to some jaw-dropping figures, quite frankly. Surely we should give him a bit of credit and give him a bit of space to get this back on track, because he does seem to have some magic that the public are hungry for.
He does. Well, he's a great campaigning asset, and he's one of the most recognisable politicians, even before he was Prime Minister. He had the highest recognition ratings and also approval ratings, I think, of any politician. Obviously the issue now is that people, I think, as your previous guest was saying, people are saying, well, how do you govern? You've won elections. We like you. You're good on the stump. What actual policies have you got? And in the absence of those, these political issues have been rumbling along. And I think the Prime Minister really is quite desperate to just get from now to Christmas without having to put any restrictions in place and just try and reset everything in the new year and just hope that all of this stuff around Christmas parties and cheese and all the rest of it that's been eaten in the latest photographs that have emerged, all of that is kind of forgotten about almost, and he gets a bit of a clean slate in the new year. And as you say, people can kind of judge him a bit more openly.
But is it the problem that people are wised up to his tactics now, the sort of distraction technique, that look over here, and I'm not going to put a lockdown on people before Christmas, there won't be that, we'll do this for just 3 weeks and never again, and the bonfire of the masks, the next thing you know, there's a screeching U-turn again. It's a bit like the boy who's cried wolf, isn't it? How can we take him seriously now?
Well, I think there's two things. First thing is that we've had COVID, which kind of derailed his political agenda, really. As soon as he took over, he was basically trying to deliver Brexit, and then he was meant to be setting out a domestic agenda of, we keep hearing this term, levelling up. So going around the regions and trying to, promote economic growth in areas where it's been depressed for many years in post-industrial towns and so on. COVID kind of shot that to pieces, and he never really got it back. And and it is the fault of Number 10 for doing it, because we've had from June, when the lockdown was lifted, to around now, which is nearly 6 months, for them to put a political agenda in place, start coming out with some decent policies. We haven't seen any policies is the big problem. And I think that's a real issue with him. He's a great communicator, great campaigner, but he needs to be backed by a really serious group of people that can put decent policies together and give him something to announce, because he keeps doing speeches saying Britain's going to be the best place in the world to run a business or have artificial intelligence or whatever it is. He literally does these speeches all of the time, and there's no policy behind them really. Most of the time, just a very weak paper without any commitments in it. So he really needs to hit the new year, hopefully get past this, the kind of Christmas party stuff, which is, I think, a bit of a I think it's being blown up as more serious than it really is. Although I'm not underplaying it, but it's people at work having a drink. It's not exactly something, a great bombshell. But in order to get over this kind of tittle-tattle, you need to have a proper policy agenda, and we haven't seen one from him yet. And I'm really hoping that in the new year they can set something out.
Here's a bit of a sporting analogy. It's all very well having the star striker, but if you have, oh look, we've lost Sean, black screen. But do you know what? Luckily enough, I've got Albie Amankona, who is a co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism for Equality, joining me in the studios. Now, Albie, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Boris Johnson, the leader. Now, a lot of people are saying he is great. He delivers great speeches. He's got that feel-good factor. Even when he's giving you bad news, there's something you kind of want to love him. He's sort of embodies this sense of optimism and a sort of quintessential Britishness, which is really quite attractive. But how much of this is down to him having bad advisors, and how much is down to just pure bad leadership?
You're absolutely right with all of those qualities that you just described in Boris. He's a very likeable leader, a very likeable man, and he cuts across to a demographic of the population which the Conservative Party has never reached before. There are a lot of seats in the north of England, like the seat where my grandma lives, who voted Conservative for the very first time ever. I don't know that there's any other Conservative Party politician at the moment who could deliver that kind of result. So I think we have to slightly temper our criticism of Boris by thinking about who would really replace him. I'm not sure who would, and I think that is the big question at the moment with many Conservatives. I don't think it's the right time for a leadership election.
I mean, having a leader who's a bon vivant and loves a jolly good old time and makes us all grin is a wonderful thing, actually, especially in a pandemic where it's very easy to be quite sour-faced about the situation. But at the end of the day, these are very testing times for any government in the world. Do you think he's got the credentials to actually really deliver? Or is he just a fantastic orator, a wonderful mouthpiece, but just not a good politician.
It's been an extremely testing time for governments across the world. It's been an extremely testing time for the members of the public across the world. Boris Johnson does have a track record of delivery. He delivered Brexit. He delivered lots of infrastructure during his period as London mayor. He delivered the London Olympics. He does have a track record of delivery. The last 2 years have been very hard for governments all across the world. Angela Merkel had bad approval ratings. Donald Trump had bad approval ratings. Name me one leader in the world which has actually had a good pandemic. No one has. That doesn't take away from the mistakes that have been made recently. I think there are some huge questions around reacting to events recently, whether or not it's Patterson, whether or not it's Peppa Pig, whether or not it's parties, whether or not it's Plan B. We can't forget that. And I hope that in the new year we have a reset, like many of your guests were saying before, and we can focus on delivering the priorities for the people of Britain.
I liked your consonants there, your parties, Peppa Pig, Plan B, Patterson, pandemic, very poetic.
Thank you.
If you had Boris's ear right now, what would you be saying to him? What would you say? Look, he's coming into 2022. You've got to pull your sleeves up and get back to business because, frankly, it's not really working well at the moment. What advice would you give him?
I would say to Boris, look at the team around you and think about if any changes need to be made. One of the things that I really respected Theresa May for doing after the 2017 general election disaster for the Conservatives is she completely reorganised Number 10. She got rid of Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill. She got a new team in there and they helped advise her on the best course of action. Now, there are a lot of people that think that was a bad course of action, but the sentiment was there. It's about showing to the public that you realise that mistakes have been made and that you're ready to do the groundwork to make up to the public and deliver on the promises that you promised them back in 2019. We've seen a number of manifesto pledges turned back on. That's never good for any voter, for any party, but we need to start seeing some real progress on the other priorities of the people.
I mean, the Conservative Party have a pretty rich history of getting rid of their own leaders, of plotting and scheming. Is that because the Conservative Party is perhaps such a broad church? It was the party that sort of tore itself apart over Brexit. Frankly, at the moment, you're more likely to see the Labour Party agreeing with the government rather than its own backbenches. Do you think the problem here is Boris Johnson has to appease two wings of one party that can't be reconciled? Everyone talks about Labour a bit like that, the Corbynistas versus the Keirites, let's call them, and saying, well, how do you combine these two together? And perhaps it's the product of a two-party system. But is it not about time that we recognise that the Conservative Party is equally as divided and Boris Johnson is essentially oscillating between two?
I think at times, and specifically now, and also I think during Brexit, the Conservative Party has been very divided. I don't think as much as Labour, though, recently. But a good Conservative leader, a good Conservative Prime Minister will be able to bring together the two wings of the Conservative Party. It is possible to do that. We did that in 2019 with great success, and we've now got a huge majority. David Cameron did it. Theresa May wasn't able to do it. It's not an impossible task. I think the Prime Minister's up to the job.
Albie, thank you so much, and I'm sure that Boris will appreciate your vote of confidence as well. Thank you for coming into the studio as well.
Sure.
Cheers. Well, it's been a very interesting period, hasn't it? And what do you think of all of the guests' opinions so far? What are your opinions? Remember, keep those emails coming in, gbnews@gbnews.uk. Now, after the break, the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell on sex trafficking charges will be hearing its closing arguments today in the US. So we're going to be getting the latest from host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Dudridge. But first, let's have a look at the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. We keep a lot of cloud in the sky, I think, during the next 24 hours, but by the start of Tuesday, there is an increasing chance of cloud breaks in some places, leading to a frosty start, but a good chance of sunshine by the afternoon. Here's the area of high pressure that's been keeping us dry, settled, but also mostly cloudy during the last few days. Now, during Monday, some slightly less moist air drifted in from the east, and that's led to those cloud bases lifting a touch and a better chance of breaks developing within the cloud. But these breaks are always quite tenuous and difficult to pinpoint, so a good chance across central and western parts of the country that we'll start off with those cloud breaks and a touch of frost in places on Tuesday morning. But in general, we keep a lot of cloud, I think, particularly in the east and in the south. And again, we'll see a lot of that cloud drift around during Tuesday itself. But you can see some reasonable cloud breaks and sunshine developing during the afternoon across parts of central and western England into Wales, western Scotland as well. A pleasant enough day where we get some sunshine coming through at last. Otherwise, mostly it's cloudy and it's feeling cold, 5, 6, 7 Celsius, about as high as those temperatures will get. And then, with the chance of those more extensive cloud breaks by the end of Tuesday, we go into the start of Wednesday with the fairly widespread frost, I think, across Scotland, England and Wales, particularly away from towns and cities, temperatures dipping a degree or so below freezing. But for Northern Ireland, it's milder as cloud rolls in here and the first signs of a change on the way midweek. Outbreaks of rain, a wet start for Northern Ireland, and then those outbreaks of rain pushing into southwestern Scotland by the afternoon, as well as Wales and southwest England. Some heavy rain for a time, and that moves into the colder air further east. So there's the chance of some snow on the tops of the Pennines and Scottish mountains, but it turns milder and wetter in the south.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. You're watching the Afternoon Agenda on GB News, and there's lots more still to come. But first, let's get a check on the news headlines with Polly.
Good evening, I'm Polly Middlehurst with your latest news headlines. The Prime Minister has said in the last half hour tougher COVID restrictions won't be introduced immediately, but the government isn't ruling out further action. Boris Johnson says the data is still being monitored hourly and the arguments for stricter measures are being finely balanced. He's urging the public to exercise caution over the Christmas period. In his most recent statement, the Prime Minister also spoke of the importance of looking after the hospitality sector. He added they'll keep the economic side under constant review. This follows leaders urging the Chancellor to offer emergency financial support within the next 24 hours after a dramatic fall in bookings due to the Omicron variant. The Deputy Prime Minister has meanwhile denied his colleagues broke lockdown rules after a picture emerged showing the Prime Minister and his staff having cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden during the first national lockdown. The Guardian newspaper released the photograph showing the Prime Minister drinking at a table with his wife and two others with other staff members nearby. But Dominic Raab stressed the garden was a place of work and that sometimes staff would have a drink after a long day or a long week. At least 375 people have died and more than 500 are injured following the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year. More than 50 others are still missing. Officials say several central provinces are struggling without power and are desperately seeking food and water. Here, the Advertising Standard Agency has told the sandwich chain Pret a Manger it should consider reviewing its £20 a month coffee subscription deal. As part of the deal, Pret subscribers can choose 5 drinks every day, including smoothies. But customers are complaining the smoothies are often not available, with many shops saying they can't make them. Those are your headlines. I'll bring you a full news update at 6.
Thank you, Polly. Now, let's look to the US, where the jury in Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking trial could begin deliberating today as the prosecution and defence make their closing arguments. If convicted, Maxwell could face more than 80 years behind bars. The 59-year-old has... Oh, we are not going to stick with that because we've lost our guest. So instead, we're going to try and see if we can get back to the Ghislaine Maxwell trial a bit later. Trials and tribulations, that's what we're suffering today at GB News with our tech. But we're going to give you that story as soon as possible. But first, let's now talk about hospitality, because over 100,000 retail, hospitality and leisure businesses are calling on the government to offer more support to help them with the impact of the Omicron variant. Restaurants and pubs have been dealing with large numbers of cancellations in the run-up to Christmas. Well, Simon Delaney is the landlord of the Fairbank Pub and Kitchen in Manchester. Now, Simon, you've seen a huge change in customers, haven't you, since the spread of Omicron?
Well, yeah, to be honest, even coming out of lockdown, was it the second or third lockdown, we've been struggling to get customers anyway. And bookings were very low for the festive time, 2 weeks usually running up to Christmas. Now introduced Plan B and Omicron, and we have got no bookings. We would normally, we're a wet-led pub, but we serve food, and we would normally have lots of festive bookings, groups of family friends, work colleagues, whatever. And on the next 5 days this week, up to Friday, we've got none whatsoever. The ones we did have cancelled.
You seem mighty cheerful still. I mean, I don't know how you're staying so positive. This must be having a shocking impact on your business. I'd imagine the festive season is the time where you make a lot of your money for a rainy day.
Well, to be honest, it's where the profit is, and it's not necessarily about the profit. What Christmas normally does is gets you through January, February and March. And I think that's what our industry was all hoping, that we could have a bumper Christmas, and it would get us to when we were all worried about April coming, because obviously that's when the cuts change. That's when the help sort of like dwindles down that they've already given us. So we were sort of hoping for a bumper time. I think the realisation came on Friday, when Mad Friday just didn't happen. And I know some of the people in hospitality are still trading at good numbers, but I believe that over 70% of us are not. Mad Friday It was Sad Friday. I have two pubs in Manchester, and one of them was actually closed 2 hours before it's normally closed on a Friday night. It was probably the worst Friday that we've had in months.
Is it the uncertainty that's really difficult here? Because people are thinking, well, if the government suddenly introduced the fact that we've got to sit outside, or there's a rule of 6, or whatever, new fandangled or perhaps old-fangled policy that they're going to recycle, is it that's the problem? If you just knew what you were dealing with, do you think you'd still be able to make it work?
Well, I think, to be honest, it always has been the uncertainty, hasn't it? Right back to when it all started, they do all the scaremongering, and what they've done is they've scared people, and then you've got the knock-on effect where if one family's not coming in, that family might not be scared, but they're thinking, well, we're not going in. And it is that uncertainty, where we're struggling to break even at the moment, where now we've plummeted below break-even point. And it's if they've got to shut hospitality, that's got to be, I think everybody wants the same thing. Nobody wants to put that extra pressure on the NHS. No one wants to overwhelm the NHS. But what we need to do is understand that what hospitality does for the economy, what it does, the amount of revenue it makes in taxes. And I think what they need to do is as most of the big leaders, I'm just an owner-operator in Manchester with two little pubs. I'm just a small fish in a big, massive ocean. What we need is that help now, the similar help to what they did right at the start, with some speed, because that was one of the other things that was a massive failing. They introduced this help, but then it takes weeks for it to actually come. And in between then, that's the difference between a business staying above water. And it's not just about me. It's about, I have 40 staff who work for me. All their jobs at the moment are in they don't know where they are. Are they going to have a job in January? We just don't know. And it is that uncertainty. And I think Richard Sunak needs to pop up from wherever he is and make some, make some sense, because telling us that the 5% cut on VAT for food, it's no good. That cut on VAT is no good if we've not got customers. It's irrelevant.
The problem here that rather than just saying we're going to shut you down and, pay you compensation, instead there's a drip of regulations which act as deterrents on the very people that you need to see encouraged to come through your front door.
Exactly. It's scaring people in it. It's a little bit like go to work, don't go to work, go to work, don't go to work. It's the same, go to the pub, don't go to the pub, be cautious. You're telling people to stay indoors, don't go to work, now work from home if you can. So anybody with any kind of intelligence is going to think, well, hang on a minute, if I can't go to work, surely it can't be right going to a pub that's busy. Even though I think it's been proven that pubs were the safest places to go because we're used to all these rules, legislation. We're used to putting things in place, so we made them very, very, very safe, and at a great expense as well. But if people are left to their own decisions, and that's what I think he's done, he's really avoided saying don't go to the pub, to avoid giving us any kind of financial help, and scared people, and people will now not come out of the homes or will be very cautious where they go, because that's the advice.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more, Simon. Well, best of luck for 2022. Let's hope for your sake and for everyone's sakes that we'll all be able to gather around the bar again, and on a regular basis too, I'd like to think. Simon Delaney, who's the landlord of the Fairbank Pub and Kitchen. Now, still to come on the afternoon agenda, it's time to hear what you think about leadership. Is Boris Johnson still the right man to be leading our country during this extremely perilous period? We'll be back in just a moment. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now we can cross to the US, where the jury in the Ghislaine Maxwell sex trafficking trial could begin deliberating today as the prosecution and defence make their closing arguments. If convicted, Maxwell could face more than 80 years behind bars. The 59-year-old has denied grooming underage girls for abuse by the late paedophile Jeffrey Epstein between 1994 and 2004. Well, I'm pleased to say that finally joining us live from Los Angeles is the host of the podcast, The Politics People, Paul Duddridge. Now, Paul, you've been following this case closely. What do you think we should be expecting to hear today?
Well, the prosecution have actually already brought in at the very last minute, just prior to them giving their closing arguments, they brought in a couple of bombshell bits of evidence. The little black book, the fated little black book, has finally been introduced into evidence by the prosecution. Many feared it would be brought in by the defence as a sentencing bargaining chip subsequently, but the prosecution have brought that in today, just prior to beginning their closing arguments, and video of the 2005 raid on Epstein's mansion in Florida, which reads very lurid. I would imagine if you're a juror in that New York federal trial at the moment, that is going to leave a lasting impression. So these two bits of final evidence were brought in at the very last moment before the closing arguments were begun by the prosecution. That's expected, if it hasn't already, whilst we're on air, if it hasn't already completed, if the government hasn't completed their closing arguments, they should be any moment now, and the defence is slated to have 45 minutes they've asked for rebuttal, and it doesn't look like they're going to go over that. So either way, the whole thing should be handed to the jury to deliberate today.
And do you expect those deliberations to take a while? It seems to me that it's probably looking as if they're going to record a guilty verdict, if I were to make a prediction myself.
I'm not a betting man, but I think you're probably right. And I think some of the indicators of that are, this was slated to be a 6-week trial. If you recall, it began on November the 29th, and it was slated to last for 6 weeks. And so the anticipation was the defence were going to bring witness after witness. On Friday, Ghislaine Maxwell herself declared that she would not be taking the stand. And so what was going to be a protracted 6-week trial is kind of over in 3 weeks. And that doesn't bode very well for Ghislaine Maxwell, I believe, looking at the weight of evidence that the prosecution has brought to bear. One of the interesting things is that regardless of how this goes, she's on 6 charges. She's facing 6 charges. If found guilty on all 6, she is facing 70 years. One of the charges alone, which is the sex trafficking, has a maximum sentence of 40 years. So that's the big verdict to be looking out for when this actually gets announced, or when the jury actually considers its verdict. But yeah, this has been brought forward really, really quickly, and the defense asked that that there's a separate charge of perjury which arises from a 2016 deposition that Ghislaine Maxwell gave. For some reason, the defense asked for that to be tried separately. So even if she's found not guilty on these charges in this trial, she is definitely facing a perjury case subsequently, which her own defence asked to be tried separately. So she's got future legal worries regardless of the outcome of this. But yes, it's not boding very well for her at the moment, looking at the wealth of evidence that the prosecution has brought to bear.
It's worth pointing out that she does, of course, deny all the charges that have been brought against her. And who are we as speculators and commentators to really know what went on? But there's been, as you said, discussion that this little black book where Epstein allegedly kept the names of, I don't know, people who might enjoy the services he may be able to offer them, that could potentially be used as a bargaining chip were she to be found guilty, that she could drop a few names and, you know, and reveal some of those people in that book in order to get a shorter sentence. How possible is that, and how worried are people about that?
Well, now it's been introduced by the prosecution as a piece of evidence. It's highly likely. I mean, it might actually hold some grounds for an appeal as well subsequently. Should, and again, as you quite rightly point out, she denies all charges against her. So if she is found guilty, but absolutely, if she is found guilty, that little black book, and now it's been actually introduced as government evidence, that little black book will be the key to her sentencing should the jury find against her. So you're absolutely right. That's going to be crucial to the sentencing deliberations that may or may not happen. And you're quite right. At this point, she denies all culpability and is strenuously defending her innocence. And so, yes, should the jury find against, that little black book we're going to be hearing about that for a long time if it goes against her.
Now, perhaps one of the last times we had a case in America that captured the world's attention would have been, of course, the O.J. Simpson trials, which were famously broadcast to all and sunder. But a lot of this trial hasn't been video recorded. Why is that?
It's a very interesting point, actually. There's a lot of, and recently we had the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, which was streamed live daily. And initially, people were very suspicious, and there was a lot of conspiracy theories about why this was being held, where we just see the old-fashioned court drawings. But again, in the US, the OJ trial was brought by the state of California, the Rittenhouse trial by the state of Wisconsin. The Maxwell trial is a federal case, so the federal government are bringing this, and there's only 3 federal courts that have even piloted cameras in the courtroom. So federal cases, largely 90% do not have cameras in the courtroom. They have media attendance, which we have. I mean, this has been widely reported. There's been no bar on media entry, but federal cases do not have cameras in the court. Largely, a judge can actually decide that if he wants to upend that rule, but they haven't in this case, and they mostly do not. So this is a federal case, and that's why you haven't seen cameras in the courtroom. There is. Well, it's the opposite of there's nothing to see here. There's lots to see here, but I don't think that this can be a conspiracy theory. But that was something that until somebody pointed out that this is normal, that federal cases don't have cameras, there was a lot of speculation on the internet, but it was all kind of incorrect. It was this is a normal legal procedural position in US law.
How much are people talking about this case over in the States? I mean, it comes and goes in and out of our news agenda, usually when it relates to Prince Andrew, of course. But how captivated are people by this trial? Are they sort of hanging on every word, or is it not really getting the same sort of publicity, so to speak, as big cases like the O.J. Simpson case?
Well, you see, you make a great point with the previous question. Because it's not on TV, kind of nobody's talking about it. This is, I mean, I'm a proud American as well as a proud Brit. But if it's not on TV, it's not happening. And so it has largely been overlooked in this country, simply because it's not streamed every day. If it's not somewhere between this, People's Court, Judge Judy, and Family Feud, people aren't watching, so it's not getting the kind of attention that something like an OJ did. And you know, OJ was famously a well televised, timed to fit the schedules. It was almost like the moon landing. So yes, it's not getting that kind of attention because it's not on TV. I love America, but that is why they're not taking that much notice of it.
Fascinating stuff. I'm always amazed by the culture the other side of the pond, you know. Paul Dudridge, thank you so much for joining us today. Host of the Politics People podcast and keeping a close eye on that trial for us all. Now, the Premier League have decided not to implement a COVID circuit breaker after a meeting with shareholders, despite rising numbers of cases within squads. Over half of the weekend's Premier League games were called off, with numbers of COVID cases soaring. Now, a number of clubs are unhappy over last-minute cancellations, most notably Burnley, whose game at Aston Villa was called off just 2 hours before kick-off. I can now speak to former England manager Sam Allardyce. Sam, fantastic to have you. Sam's joining us by phone today. Sam, what do you make of this? Do you think the Premier League needs some sort of circuit breaker, or have they made the right decision and the games must go on?
Well, I mean, it's to what cost for the football clubs, isn't it? You know what I mean? Because the managers could easily find themselves without 6 or 7 players. When is the cut-off to stop playing a team? What is the cost if you can't play your best players? So it's not all playing by the same rules, because the bigger clubs have the bigger squads. So, for instance, Burnley, if they're forced to play with 7 players out with COVID, then it would be unlikely they would achieve any type of result. So that could then well cause relegation, that could lose Sean Dyche's job after doing so well for the best part of 8-9 years in the Premier League with Burnley. So it is very, very difficult indeed as a manager to think that you can cope with just putting any old team out when you've got 6 or 7 or 8 players out with COVID.
I mean, there are people speculating in the press today and over the weekend as to how many footballers have taken up the COVID vaccine. I've heard reports that around a quarter of them have not had any vaccines whatsoever. 16% have only had 1 vaccination. Could that be behind this flurry of cases? And is it time that potentially football clubs had a word with some of their players about this?
Well, if you force anybody in this country to try and do something, there's uproar, isn't there? I mean, there's absolute bedlam and mayhem by saying you cannot even suggest that you must have a jab. So it's got to be entirely up to you with our politically correct world today. But, you know, for me, does jabbing stop you getting the coronavirus? I've had 3 jabs and they tell me it won't stop me catching the Omicron virus. So I won't catch it as bad as I would if I didn't have the jabs. But so it's not a prevention of coronavirus. It's only a helping to the fact that it helps you get over it quicker than you would normally and doesn't put you in hospital, apparently. So that's only what I read on the news. Of course, I'm not a scientist, but I think that what clubs have to do is get back to what they did last season, which is make sure we keep the fans first, no matter what. That's imperative, because that keeps the money coming in and flowing, keeps the atmosphere right. But the clubs should go back to perhaps what they did last season, when they break up the dressing room, travel in 3 coaches, isolate the players in the rooms in the hotels when they play away, wear masks, keep hand sanitising, and keep them separated in the training ground. And that sort of worked last season when I was at West Brom. So put that into place first, and then players may not come down with COVID as quick as they are now.
And there's a bit of a divide, isn't there? And COVID's really exacerbated that between the top-tier teams and, as you're saying, the teams in lower leagues when it comes to how impacted they were by COVID. Do you think the Premier League should be looking to help other leagues out financially in any way they can to make sure that grassroots football can survive this period?
No, the government should be doing that, because they take tax and national insurance off us. So that's their responsibility in the lower leagues. Like you mean, this is our sport. This is our best sport. This is what sport should be. The government are very good at taking the billions and billions of pounds of the tax and national insurance, but are not willing to give back for what they take. So you can't keep asking the Premier League, who are obviously the wealthiest part of our leagues in this country, but you know, they all have their own spending budgets in place. and they've all lost money last year that they have to try and make up in some way. And ultimately, if you start taking money off them, they will only put it back on the fan. That fan's already paying enough to play and watch Premier League football at the moment.
Yeah, extraordinary prices at the turnstiles, that's for sure. Sam, it's been a real honour talking to you today. Thank you for joining us on the afternoon agenda. Sam Allardyce, who else? Big Sam, the one and only. You've been watching the afternoon agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. I've loved your company, so do join me again tomorrow, 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. as per usual. For me, it's a good evening. Coming up next, of course, it's Michelle Dewberry of Dubes & Co, so don't go anywhere. Bye-bye.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. We keep a lot of cloud in the sky, I think, during the next 24 hours, but by the start of Tuesday, there is an increasing chance of cloud breaks in some places, leading to a frosty start, but a good chance of sunshine by the afternoon. Here's the area of high pressure that's been keeping us dry, settled, but also mostly cloudy during the last few days. Now, during Monday, some slightly less moist air drifted in from the east, and that's led to those cloud bases lifting a touch and a better chance of breaks developing within the cloud. But these breaks are always quite tenuous and difficult to pinpoint, so a good chance across central and western parts of the country that we'll start off with those cloud breaks and a touch of frost in places on Tuesday morning. But in general, we keep a lot of cloud, I think, particularly in the east and in the south. And again, we'll see a lot of that cloud drift around during Tuesday itself. But you can see some reasonable cloud breaks and sunshine developing during the afternoon across parts of central and western England into Wales, western Scotland as well. A pleasant enough day where we get some sunshine coming through at last. Otherwise, mostly it's cloudy and it's feeling cold, 5, 6, 7 Celsius, about as high as those temperatures will get. And then with the chance of those more extensive cloud breaks by the end of Tuesday, we go into the start of Wednesday with the fairly widespread frost, I think, across Scotland, England and Wales, particularly away from towns and cities, temperatures dipping a degree or so below freezing. But for Northern Ireland, it's milder as cloud rolls in here and the first signs of a change on the way midweek. Outbreaks of rain, a wet start for Northern Ireland, and then those outbreaks of rain pushing into southwestern Scotland by the afternoon, as well as Wales and southwest England. Some heavy rain for a time, and that moves into the colder air further east. So there's the chance of some snow on the tops of the Pennines and Scottish mountains, but it turns milder and wetter in the south.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for free